Folks, we all know the story. The fateful day came in this week's Parsha. That Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, is told by God Almighty, you're not going to lead the Jews into the land of Israel. And we know why that happened. God tells Moshe to speak to the rock. And what happens? He hits the rock. What is the background? This is the 40th year, the Jews in the desert. They're about to embark on the final destination, Canaan, Eretz Canaan, the land of Canaan, which eventually will be named the land of Israel, through the conquest and the resettling and the settling of the land. But before that happens, Miriam passes away in this week's Parsha. And as we realize, actually in her passing, sometimes in people's lives we don't realize that we had a great merit, a miracle many miracles that occurred, but one miracle that occurred in her merit. And that was the Jews being taken care of their needs for water. Be'er shel Miriam, the well of Miriam. Actually, Be'er means a well, but really it was this kind of moving object of a rock, sea, that went along with the Jews throughout the desert and took care of them. Well, now that she passed away, the water supply wasn't there anymore. Now, when you're in the desert, you need some water. You need probably a lot of water. And the Jews didn't have it. So, of course, they cried out to Moshe, we need water. Now, interesting to note is that this water, okay, this water, the Be'er shel Miriam, the wellspring, was a miracle that it was already planned on the eve of the first Shabbos of God's creation of the world. As it says in Tractate Psachim, 10 things were created on the eve of Shabbos at twilight, and one was the well. There's Ramana, the rainbow, and other things. And as Rashi explains, that this well refers to the well of Miriam, the rock from which Moshe brought out water. It was round, a sieve-like, and it went along with them wherever they went. So now that the Jews are complaining, so they go to Moshe Rabbeinu, asking him, complaining to him, their usual way. And he goes to God, what should I do? So God says, and let me, excuse me a second. Oh, there we go. Okay. Let's share the screen here. So here we go. In this week's Parsha, and Moshe and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly unto the door of the tent of meeting and fell upon their faces, and the glory of God appeared unto them. And God spoke unto Moshe, saying, take the staff and the assemble the congregation, you and your brother Aaron, and speak to the rock in the presence, so that it will give forth its water. You shall bring forth water for them from the rock, and give the congregation and their livestock to drink. So this is clearly the command on high, what needs to be done. And of course, what happens? Moshe hits the rock 2 times, and yes, water does come, and the Jews, their thirst is quenched, as the verse says. And Moshe took the rod from before God. And as he was commanded, Moshe and Aaron assembled the congregation in front of the rock. And he said to them, now listen, you rebels, can you draw water? Can we draw water for you from this rock? Moshe raised his hand and struck the rock with his staff twice, when an abundance of water gushed forth, and the congregation and their livestock drank. So, what do we have here? An error that was made on Moshe's part, that even though in the end the Jews did get water to drink, but this was bittersweet. And what is this called? Mei Meriva. This is called the waters of strife, where this occurred because Moshe didn't do exactly as God asked him to do. As the verses continue in this week's Parsha, God said to Moshe and to Aaron, since you did not have faith in me to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you shall not bring the assembly to the land which I have given them. These are the waters of strife, where the children of Israel contended with God, and he was sanctified through them. So the obvious question, I'm sure this is on your mind, as it's on many of the commentators in the Torah, their minds. Okay, it was a mistake, but so grave that Moshe Rabbeinu should not be able to bring the Jewish people into the land of Israel? Why? What is so grave about this? What is so terrible about the fact that he was supposed to speak to the rock, yet he hits the rock? So we will give a few explanations, 4 actually. A simple explanation, a homiletic explanation, meaning a darash, more kind of digging a bit deeper, not the simple meaning. And then we'll give 2 mystical teachings on how we take this in a different context completely. And most importantly, not only to have answers to this, but how does this apply to us in our day and age? Of course, we want to understand Torah and what the storyline is. But more important than understanding merely the storyline is understanding how the Torah is a lesson and a guide in my life. It needs to be relevant to me. And that's where we want to make sure that we have some understanding. Now, with this, we need to appreciate, often, because when you read something, we're used to trying to understand something in its simplistic terms. And of course, the Torah doesn't go out of its simplistic terms. But yet at the same time, Torah is God's wisdom. God's wisdom has an infinite amount of understanding. There's layers upon layers. As a matter of fact, our sages say, Yeshivim panim laTorah. The Medrash says there are 70 facets to the Torah. Now, that doesn't mean 70 simple explanations. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, thank you. That doesn't mean 70 simple explanations. Actually, I'm sorry, it does mean that. 70 on the simple level, 70 on the midrashic homiletic level, 70 on the hinted, and 70 on the mystical. On every level, there's layers upon layers, angles upon angles to understand. Why? Because it's not just about understanding the truth of history. Because, the truth of history seemingly would only have one simplistic truth. Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. Simple, historic truth, period. So same thing you could say, Moses hit the rock. Simple, well, not so simple, because it's not about just an action that happened. It's about understanding why that action happened, why there's a punishment, what exactly that punishment is, specific to the crime, right? So, and ultimately, if we can bring them all together, then we really come and have a very fascinating understanding. So, let us begin with the simple understanding, and that is Moshe Rabbeinu is a righteous individual. Being a righteous individual, that means he is on a completely different pedestal. He's on a pedestal, shall we say, in the sense that what is expected from him is not what the average person is expected from them, from the average individual. By way of metaphor, when a child says something that is a little inappropriate, okay. But when the adult says the same thing, it's totally inappropriate because we expect more from the adult. So likewise, that's my metaphor, to understand, to explain that Moshe Rabbeinu, what was expected from him is something very different. We're coming from Gimel Tammuz, and we're speaking a lot recently about the Rebbe and what a tzaddik is. A tzaddik is every single nuance about them is a reflection of the divine. And that's who Moses is, a complete mirror image of the divine. And here, although it's seemingly small and insignificant, from speaking to hitting the rock in the end, the water did sprout forth. A miracle did occur. The Jews were taken care of their needs. No, it did reflect to the precision of God's will. A righteous person is nothing but a mere reflection of the will above. As the Rashbam explains. And therefore, he gets punished because expecting him to be perfectly in sync with the divine. It goes even a step further. If you recall, go back for a moment, what does God say to him? And God spoke to Moses saying, take the staff and assemble the congregation. He said, speak to the rock, but he said, take the staff. So he did, God say to take it. And there's even a precedent. 40 years earlier, Moshe also was told by God, when the Jewish people were thirsty, to bring them, the assembly, together. And there he said, hit the rock. There he said, hit the rock. Now, though, he didn't say hit the rock. So even though there was a precedent, and this is the nuance over here. On one hand, God tells him to take the staff. So obviously he thought that there's something that he has to do with that staff. On the other hand, he says clearly to speak to the rock. There's a precedent that he did 40 years earlier. God told him to hit it then, not to speak to it. Point being over here, that even though that there is such a precedent, nonetheless, righteous individuals, again, being so in sync with the divine, a mirror reflection, God was not sanctified in the manner that he had asked to be sanctified, than merely speaking to the rock. Therefore, he's punished. Now, you can ask the question, according to the simple explanation, get that he did something that on the level of a righteous person is grievous, but why that particular punishment of not being able to take the Jews into the land of Israel? With the simple explanation, we don't really get an understanding of that. And that's why not always do we have a full understanding in one explanation. We need other explanations. And sometimes with all of the layers of explanation, then we get a full picture of the divine wisdom, and then we can understand the storyline. So let us go a step further. Okay, with another explanation. Another explanation based on the Medrash is that it was not about hitting the rock was the problem, rather than speaking to the rock. It was about how Moshe Rabbeinu dealt with the Jews, his conduct with the Jews in this particular time. What does he call them? He refers to them as Moirim, which is translated as rebellious ones. And the Midrash says, well, this is analogous to the following, and let's get the following here in our screen. The Midrash says, to what was Moshe analogous? To a king who placed his son under the charge of a tutor and instructed him, do not call my son a Moira. What does a Moira mean? It is like the Greek word, one who shouts to a fool, moros. Moros being in Greek, the word for dull, slow, or stupid. In English, which is taken from this word, is moron, right? So don't call him that. Once it happened that the tutor called the boy Mora, the king said to him, with all my soul I ordered you, and said, do not call my son a Mora, and yet you call him a Mora. A wise man has no business with a fool. So it is written, and God spoke to Moshe and to Aaron and commanded them to the children of Israel. What did he command to them? He told them, do not call my children fools. Once they antagonized him at the waters of strife, Moshe said to them, hear now, you Morim. God then said to him, with all of my being I commanded you and told you, do not call my children Morim. Now that you have called out Morim, a wise person does not get along with a fool. So God tells an important thing to Moshe. Now, and Moshe, in not the simple meaning of the text, but through a Jewish homiletic understanding, is what we have here from the Medrash, is leading a nation that is extremely difficult. And yet, that frustration, because of their insubordinance, he needed to conduct himself with patience, with kindness. Don't call them that they're rebellious. Is it the truth? Yes. But yet, not the way to refer to them. So God says, as a result, you lack faith. In who? The Jewish people. Therefore, you're not fitting to lead them anymore. So this gives us now a deeper understanding of the particular punishment. Not fitting to lead because of how you've conducted yourself with these Jewish people. Yet we need to understand yet deeper. How do we understand that Moshe Rabbeinu would act in such a way? After all, it is Moshe Rabbeinu. How do we get a deeper understanding of what's going on over here? So now we have to go deeper into another layer, and that layer is based on Kabbalah, based on Hasidus, based on the Rebbe's teachings, which is taking the story from a non-literal to a abstract spiritual idea. Now you might say, whoa, how's that going to give us understanding over here? Please. Abstracted from the literal, even from the homiletic. Maybe to teach us a lesson, but why would we be doing that? It's because ultimately the Torah, where does it begin? Where is the root of the Torah? In divine wisdom. So it actually begins not as a narrative of, in this case, the Jews in the Midbar, in the desert for 40 years, is what we're learning in this book of Bamidbar, in the fourth book of Numbers. That's not where it began. It didn't begin with a story. It began with divine wisdom that actually preceded creation of the world. So the Torah really is something that is from on high, that evolved or devolved, and now became a narrative that we learn and a storyline that we try to understand. But if you really want to understand it, you can't merely understand it on the literal level or even on the homiletic level as it is evolves or devolves as a narrative in the Torah. But you have to understand it in its spiritual roots, the way it is, so to speak, above. I hope that idea is clear. Well, let's see what the Rebbe says. Let's see what the Rebbe says. Digging deeper. The Rebbe says as follows. As is well known, our sages have taught that the Torah preceded the world. As they put it, the Torah preceded the world by 2,000 years. I love Chachma. I love Chabina. 2,000, why? Chachma and Bina, wisdom, understanding. The divine wisdom and understanding of the Torah. In other words, despite the fact that the scripture never departs from the literal interpretation, and the literal meaning of the Torah is the primary way it's learned in the physical world, still, the Torah preceded the world. Every single word of the Torah also possesses an esoteric spiritual meaning, which is how the Torah is learned in the upper spiritual worlds, which lie far beyond material matters. Obviously, this rule is not only true of the Torah's commandments, but also the stories of the Torah. Though every story in the Torah occurred literally as related in the Torah, in its every detail, nevertheless, in as much as the Torah preceded the world, it follows that the stories of the Torah also possess spiritual meaning appropriate to the form it takes in those supernal worlds. On the contrary, as suggested from the famous adage, the Torah speaks primarily of the upper worlds and alludes secondly to the lower worlds, meaning our world. Not only can the words of the Torah also be interpreted along the spiritual lines as the Torah exists in the upper worlds, but the reverse. The origin and the beginning of the Torah is in the upper world. It is from there that the Torah descended and devolved below into material form. Thus, the Torah is actually speaking in spiritual terms in the upper worlds, but when it comes down below into this world, it can be interpreted in a straightforward manner relative to the lower worlds. Fascinating idea. So, what do we have over here? So, what do we have over here now, if we're looking at it this way? So, it is all... You know, we've learned this idea before many times. You know, God creates the world, not 5,780 years ago, but constantly, something from nothing. Therefore, it's the word of God, as we just finished our Yichud B'Emunah today, that is animating. So God is constantly communicating in his creative force of everything. So in the creative force that he is communicating, bringing into existence, everything in creation, and hence communicating as a result, that means everything in the physical world really reflects something that is far and above and beyond it. Ultimately, Chassidim would say that the physical world is nothing but a mashal, nothing but an analogy, a metaphor for the divine. And we've learned this often in the past, in Tanya in particular, that everything is just a metaphor for the divine. Well, so let's understand. So what does water represent? So water represents many different things in many different instances. Of course, water is life-giving. So what does it represent? Exactly what we're doing right now. What's life-giving? Torah. As the Alter Rebbe says in chapter 4 of Tanya, that the Torah is being compared to water. Just as water descends from on high, on the top of the mountain, when it comes down to the bottom of the mountain, same water didn't change. right? I mean, might have picked up a few things on the way, but the water is the same. Likewise, God's wisdom on high is his wisdom down here. It's the same wisdom. The difference is it's just been compacted, contracted, the infinite into some physical finite existence that we can have his divine wisdom integrated in the world, that we can now understand it based on the Torah's teachings, of course. Okay. So that's what water represents. Torah, God's wisdom. Drawing water out of the rock represents the revelation of Torah from above to us. It's about, in other words, even though it's divine wisdom, we have to be able to extract it, to bring it in our lives, that it becomes meaningful, it becomes something that we can apply and learn from in our lives. So there's two ways to extract Torah wisdom. One is by straightforward, simple understanding through speech, communicating. Another is by force. What does that mean? By force means the concept of what we call pilpul. Pilpul. Pilpul means that when you have a concept, it's a method of study. It's about those hidden elements in the Torah that are concealed, and you have to kind of break your head to bring out a new layer of understanding. And this is by hitting the rock. Moshe revealed Torah through taking that which is very deeply concealed and challenged to be able to express and to reveal that wisdom. Let me explain that. In explaining Torah, which Moshe Rabbeinu is the teacher of Torah, there's two paths you can take. A simple, straight path, or a very roundabout, so to speak, rigorous, challenged way, where you're breaking the heads of individuals, like in Talmudic teachings, that you can get to the final conclusion. The method that in this mystical understanding, what Moshe did was not straightforward, which would have been talking to the rock that's going to bring out water, bring out Torah. Talking to it, meaning the rock being to the engagement to reveal the divine wisdom. God wanted that it should be straightforward and simplistic, to the point, rather than a very long exercise in like Talmudic learning, pilpul as it's called. And what was this? This was a stone, a flintstone, that has the power of fire inside. Where's that fire though? Very deep. And you have to rub very hard or in this instance, to bring out the fire, or the divine wisdom hitting in order that the water can emerge. The divine wisdom, the divine fire, the idea of fire over here, meaning that it's the wisdom is hidden very deeply, just like the fire is hidden deeply in the stone, the flint stone. But that's not what God wanted for the people. That's not what the people needed at this time. They needed something that would not be rigorous, that would not be very challenging and difficult. They needed something straightforward. So here we now have another understanding of the difficulty. First explanation was righteous person is far and above and beyond a regular individual and gets judged accordingly. Why was it a punishment of not going to the land of Israel? Well, the second explanation gives us that what was the difficulty? That he spoke in a harsh way, in a judgmental way, calling them rebellious, calling them foolish. And God didn't want him to deal with the people that way. In other words, the leadership was lacking something. Now we're taking it a step deeper. What defines the leadership is not just how you speak to the people, but ultimately leadership is through the teachings. Moshe Rabbeinu, he is our master, he's our teacher. Rebbe means my teacher. Rabbeinu means our teacher. So the method of teaching was lacking. Now, is this an appropriate method of teaching? Absolutely. Pilpul, part of Torah. But that's not what God wanted right now. He wanted to give them something more. God says, give it to them straightforward. Talk to them. Just communicate simply. The hitting was about bringing something deep within the rock. The flint stone has fire in it deep. Bring something deeper, more profound. No, this is not what is necessary right now. Excuse me. So that's Moshe Rabbeinu as a teacher. Lacking. Lacking. What does that mean? Moshe Rabbeinu, yeah. I mean, he's a human, so he's lacking. That's the third explanation. Let's go now to the fourth explanation. The fourth explanation, again, as we said, Torah really speaks about heavenly things, first and foremost. Then it descends down here and speaks about earthly things. So we need to understand it in the heavenly manner, and then we'll be able to appreciate the way it's in an earthly way. So we're going to continue with that. And therefore, in a heavenly manner, everything in creation is a metaphor for the divine. It's only teaching us something about the divine. So, what does the rock represent? So the Medrash tells us that there are different types of people. You can have a person with a heart of gold, right? Extremely generous. Kind of a person that their heart melts in compassion. They can have a person who's got a heart that's hard as a rock, right? A heart of stone. And of course, this is another deeper explanation of our challenge over here. Okay. Give me a second. What? Oh. Okay. This is an explanation based on Rabbi Shlomo Zevin, and he explains the following. There we go. Okay, there are all kinds of different types of hearts. The meaning of influencing a person are similarly varied. The way one might influence another with a soft heart or a broken heart is altogether different than the means of persuasion one might use for someone whose heart is harder. With a heart like a rock, some people need to be addressed with positive, gentle, and comforting words. For others, one must speak in thunderous tones with words as hard as nails, with a firm hand and an outstretched arm. The influencer himself also determines which means of persuasion are employed. For some, in positions of influence, it is in their very nature to speak in words that drip like dew and the gentle rain, out of love and in the spirit of sharing with a sense of fraternity and out of compassion. Some influenced by raging, storming, speaking as though with a rod in hand, to uproot, to break, to crush, and to subjugate, to hurl nothing but harsh incentive. So what do we have over here? So, just by way of example, of course, what do we have? Sometimes you have a child that, needs to do their homework and you speak gently to them. It doesn't work. You need to speak strongly and harshly to them. One of the things I do is I run a drug crisis center, but Lifeline. And sometimes with an addict, you need to be there for them with tough love. Absolutely. The football coach during halftime when their team is trailing by 2 touchdowns is going to speak very strongly in order to inspire his team. Just as the staff sergeant will deal with his troops before they go into battle to speak strongly to them. Sometimes we need to hit the rock. We need to hit the rock because sometimes the heart is stone and we need to do that. And the truth is, we have a precedent for that. Did not Moshe Rabbeinu hit the rock in the first year of the 40 years? He did. Because God himself said about the Jewish people, they're a stiff-necked people. So you need to deal with them in that manner. Sometimes that's what you have to do in order to move them along, to inspire them, to transform them. However, although that was the case in year 1, now though, God says no. Now they're complaining. I want you to speak to the rock. Yeah, Jews are stiff-necked people. Yes, they are difficult. But I need you to speak to them. I need you to speak softly to them. I need you to look beyond the complaining, the challenge, the difficulties that they are expressing now and they've expressed for a long time. And for this reason, he is punished. Because what was necessary was not a live and let live kind of attitude, because in the end, Moshe Rabbeinu is responsible for the Jewish people, but the manner that he needs to deal with them. Perhaps what we can understand is that the first year was the Jews that went out of Egypt. They were already hardened people coming out of slavery, and they needed to be sort of whipped into shape out of their slave mentality and of all the things that they picked up in Egypt. But now we're talking about the 40th year. They had all died out with the sin of the spies. So what was left? A new generation. This is a new generation that needs to be spoken to differently. They need to have a positive approach with them, a soft-spoken approach with them that will inspire them and lead them forward in divine service. So in these two mystical teachings, what we have over here, the first one was about the Torah, Moshe Rabbeinu as the leader of and a teacher, and the method of teaching. And the second point is in the delivering of the message, of delivering it in a manner of not a strong way with tough love, but in a gentle fashion to deliver the message is what was necessary. Yes, difficult, challenging, even rebellious. But this is what God wanted. This is what he deemed was necessary for these people, that they should be dealt with and influenced in a soft manner, in a soft way. And with this, then we can understand why God said to speak to the rock and not to hit the rock. So we have four explanations that tie into each other beautifully and give us a very well-rounded understanding of Moshe Rabbeinu in this week's Parsha. As painful as it is, because you live with Moshe Rabbeinu, you feel a closeness. And after all, the leader of the Jewish people, and he's not allowed into the promised land. And therefore, the lesson for us is very clear. Each and every single one of us actually have a piece of Moshe Rabbeinu in us. Chapter 42 in Tanya. Many of us will learn this together. The Alter Rebbe says, based on the verse in Deuteronomy that says, what does God ask of you? Only to fear him. That's what the verse says in Deuteronomy, in Dvarim. The Talmud says, asks the question, that's such a simple thing? Just to fear God? So simple? What's the response in the Talmud? Yeah, for Moshe Rabbeinu, for Moses, it's simple. So the Alter Rebbe asks, what's going on over here? The question is about all the Jewish people, that is not a simple thing for them. And what do you give us an answer that for Moshe Rabbeinu, for Moses, it is simple, the fear of God? It's not about Moshe, it's about all of us. It's the Talmud talking about. The Alter Rebbe explains that we all have a piece of Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu in us. So we're all many Moshe Rabbeinus. And therefore, we all have the task of being an influence, a teacher, whether it's in our family unit or whether it's beyond that in our communities. We all influence people. How do we need to do? What is the lesson from this? Yeah, there's at times that sometimes you have to strike. But that's not the lesson for today. And especially not for our generation. Our generation is a very weak generation. Back in the day, you could tell somebody the truth and they would kiss you for it. The hard truth, the harsh truth. They would kiss you for it because they were genuine and real and able to handle it. Today we're too soft. As the Rebbe says, we're the chocolate generation. We're the chocolate generation. We need to have everything soft and easy, and which means that when we are bringing out the Moses in me, the Moshe Rabbeinu in me, means when I'm dealing with others, I need to have that soft, gentle voice. Need to have that soft, gentle expression and that tone in order to influence and inspire others. And especially we're coming from Gimel Tammuz, that now the Rebbe isn't physically with us, but very much with us. I gave over to us the mandate to bring Mashiach. So we all have the capability and the opportunity to inspire others. We all have that capability. How do we have to do it? Speak in a gentle, soft manner, then others will be aroused and be inspired. Today it's really a challenge because if you go onto social media, because you're not like face to face with somebody, you can just type in something, and even though maybe your picture is there, but not really talking to the person, not like as if you're in the same room talking. In the same room, so you might think twice about how you say something. But on social media, people don't think twice because it's so impersonable. So that makes it even a greater challenge to use social media and make it personal, make it warm, make it connective. Share the word in a loving, beautiful way. Any questions, any comments? Let's see, who else am I missing here? I am terribly sorry about the Zoom today. Don't know what. Using a new laptop. So Facebook's working, but the Zoom not so great. So didn't get a chance to say, okay, why is the punishment harsh for Moshe after everything he did and not finally let him into the land of Israel? Couldn't Hashem have given him a different punishment? And why not allow him into the land? I think we explained it. I hope I explained it clearly enough. In his leadership of the Torah and teaching of it, and his leadership of the people, it needed a new leader. I heard another explanation that I'll add something. Moshe Rabbeinu was so devoted to his people of the desert, who he spent the 40 years, took him out of Egypt and spent 40 years in the desert. True devotion to his chassidim, so he stayed with them. Like the Rebbe stays with us here. Heather, thank you. Linda, thank you. Nechama, is a rational giving for why Moshe was not permitted to do tshuva. Is there a rationale? Oh, I mean, tshuva doesn't mean that the punishment doesn't exist, right? Doesn't mean that. Of course, he did tshuva. Of course, God accepted his tshuva. But that doesn't mean you get what you want just because of that. I hope there's a distinction there. Amy, thank you. Thank you for the prayers. Denise, I'll respond to that in a moment. Thank you for the question. Aryeh, Shavua Tov in Miami. Rena in Colorado. Joelle. Pamela, Northern Virginia. I'm sorry that the Zoom did not work. We'll get it working for next time. No sound. There was sound. Jake, Larry, Leanna, Danny, David, Elizabeth, Jason. Oh, all the Chabad people. Wonderful. All right, folks. This past Shabbos was our first Shabbos at Chabad Zichron Kadeshim. Many of you are online right now. You can even share, if you don't mind, on Facebook some of your thoughts, but it was amazing. Not a large crowd, but 30 people. Social distancing. Davening was beautiful. The Kiddush was, and the sharing at the Kiddush, but people's experience in reference to the Rebbe, Gimel Tammuz, was amazing. I was extremely inspired, personally. Thank all those for that inspiration. All right. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Leanna. All right, folks. Please share this with others. I'm Rabbi Ronnie Fine, coming to you from my home in Montreal, Canada. It's a privilege and a pleasure to share with you Torah studies on the Parsha. Shavua Tov, a good week. A good Tavach. All the best, everybody.